The Cruz estate sat on the golden edges of Beverly Hills, a mansion so wide that sunlight seemed to live in its windows. Every corner of it whispered success, the marble floors that glowed like mirrors, the piano that no one played, and the manicured gardens where even the roses looked rehearsed. Sir Cruz, the powerful CEO of an international hotel empire, moved through that house like a man who owned the world. Madame Cruz glided beside him, graceful, polished, and guarded, her elegance as precise as the diamonds on her wrist. But amid all that perfection lived a little boy who was the family's only true treasure. Jeremy Cruz, 7 years old, with laughter that could break silence itself. He had eyes full of wonder and a smile that carried the innocence his parents' world had long forgotten. And then there was Amber Clark, the black nanny whose presence didn't sparkle like the chandeliers but warmed the house in quieter ways. Her hands were always busy, smoothing Jeremy's blankets, fixing his breakfast, bandaging his scraped knees. To Jeremy, she wasn't staff. She was home. Every morning, his joy began the moment she entered the room. And every night, he refused to sleep until she whispered one of her soft bedtime prayers, the kind that lingered even after the lights went out. But in a house built on power and wealth, peace never stays for long. Because one morning, Jeremy's laughter stopped echoing down the hall. And the woman who loved him like her own would soon make a sacrifice so selfless, it would humble everyone who thought love could be measured by money. Welcome to our channel. If you love stories about love, acts of kindness, and second chances, you're in the right place. Please hit that subscribe button, tap the like icon, and tell us where you're watching from in the comments below. Because every story we share here reminds us that the smallest acts can change the biggest hearts. Now, let's continue with today's story. It started with small things, a cough that lingered, a tired look in Jeremy's eyes. Madame Cruz thought it was a passing cold. Sir Cruz, too busy with board meetings and global calls, brushed it off as fatigue. But when Jeremy began losing his appetite and waking in the night drenched in sweat, something in Amber's heart whispered that it was more than that. She begged Madame Cruz to take him to the hospital. The results came days later, and the sound of the doctor's voice shattered the calm that wealth had built. Jeremy has leukemia. The words fell heavy, like a door slamming shut on light. Madame Cruz gasped, covering her mouth in disbelief. Sir Cruz stood still, the man who had built empires suddenly powerless before a truth money couldn't erase. Amber felt the room spin. Her knees weakened, her hands trembling as she reached for Jeremy's small fingers. He looked up at her with innocent eyes, unaware of the storm that had begun. Days turned into hospital visits, test results, and sleepless nights. The Cruz mansion, once full of chatter and clinking glasses, turned into a silent fortress of fear. Amber stayed by Jeremy's side through every injection, every restless night, every tear. She read him stories, sang softly, prayed silently. But when chemotherapy began, the hardest moment came, the day Jeremy's hair started to fall. He stared at his reflection in the mirror, touching the bald patches on his small head. His lips quivered. "I don't want to look at me, Amber," he whispered, voice cracking. "I look weird. I don't want Mommy or Daddy to see me." Amber's heart clenched. She wanted to tell him he was beautiful, but his tears drowned every word. That night, after putting him to bed, she sat alone in her small room at the back of the house. The lamplight flickered against the plain walls as she clasped her hands. "Lord," she whispered, her voice trembling, "help me carry his pain." And that's when the thought came, soft, impossible, and pure. If Jeremy must walk this road, he wouldn't walk it alone. Before dawn, the house was quiet, too quiet. The kind of silence that makes every sound feel sacred. Amber sat before the small mirror in her room, a pair of old clippers resting on the nightstand. Her reflection stared back, tired eyes, trembling lips, and the same hair Jeremy loved to twirl around his fingers whenever he was falling asleep. Her hand hovered above the clippers as if waiting for permission from heaven. "If my baby must lose his hair," she whispered, her voice breaking, "then he won't lose it alone." The hum of the clippers filled the still air. Strands of her thick black hair fell like feathers, gathering at her feet. Each lock felt like a piece of her heart leaving her body. When the buzzing stopped, Amber looked up at her reflection. Her scalp shone under the lamp, bare, unfamiliar, yet radiant in a way only sacrifice can make someone glow. She ran her hand over her head, exhaled deeply, and for the first time in weeks, felt peace. Later that morning, she carried Jeremy's breakfast upstairs, oatmeal with honey and a little smiley face made of blueberries, just the way he liked it. When she entered the room, Madame Cruz was brushing what remained of her son's thinning hair. Jeremy turned weakly toward the door, and then froze. "Amber," he whispered, eyes wide. "Your hair, it's gone." Amber set the tray down, knelt beside his bed, and smiled softly. "I shaved it," she said. "Because if you must be brave, I'll be brave too. We'll walk this road together." For a long moment, Jeremy simply stared at her. Then his lips curved into the smallest, shyest smile. "Now we match," he said, touching his bare head. Amber's laugh trembled through the room like sunlight breaking through clouds. Madame Cruz covered her mouth, tears spilling freely. That afternoon, the mansion felt different. For the first time in months, there was warmth again, the kind that money could never buy. From that day on, Jeremy stopped hiding from the mirror. He and Amber wore colorful scarves around their heads, calling themselves the Brave Twins. Every night, before bed, Jeremy would whisper, "We are superheroes now, right?" And Amber would smile, smoothing his blanket. "Yes, baby. The bravest kind there is." Beautiful. Here's the next part. Days turned into weeks, and the rhythm of the Cruz mansion changed completely. The echo of business calls and formal dinners faded, replaced by laughter, soft but real, coming from Jeremy's room. Amber and Jeremy's morning routine became sacred. Every sunrise, she tied a bright scarf around her bald head, and Jeremy picked one to match. Red for courage, blue for joy, yellow for hope. Together, they called it their superhero uniform. Even on the hardest days, when the nausea came, when the fatigue was heavy, Jeremy's spirit no longer broke. He laughed when Amber made silly faces, whispered prayers with her before each treatment, and told everyone who visited, "We are beating it together." Sir Cruz began standing quietly at the doorway, watching. The man who once commanded empires found himself humbled by the sight of a nanny teaching his son how to fight pain with love. Madame Cruz, too, saw it. She began sitting closer to Amber, sometimes joining in their songs, sometimes just watching in silence as peace slowly returned to her home. One night, long after the doctors had left and the halls were dark, Sir Cruz passed by Jeremy's room. Through the crack in the door, he saw Amber sitting in a chair by the bed. Jeremy was asleep, his tiny fingers wrapped around hers. The dim light from the lamp glowed softly against Amber's bare scalp. Her lips moved quietly, praying, singing, maybe both. For a moment, Sir Cruz felt something shift inside him. He had built a life around numbers, contracts, and control, but in that quiet room, he witnessed something no amount of money could ever buy. The next morning, he walked into the kitchen where Amber was preparing tea. "Miss Clark," he said, his voice uncharacteristically soft. Amber looked up, startled. "Yes, sir." He hesitated, his eyes lingering on the scarf she wore. "You've given my son something." "I couldn't." Amber blinked, unsure how to respond. He continued, voice low. "I've spent my life building things that don't last. But what you've built in him, hope, courage, joy, that will never fade." Amber smiled gently. "Sir, love builds what money can't." He nodded, speechless. From then on, the Cruz mansion no longer felt like a museum of silence. It was alive again, with laughter, music, and the smell of Amber's pancakes floating through the halls. The doctors began to notice, too. Jeremy's strength improved. His body responded better than they expected. "His spirit is fighting for him," one doctor said, shaking his head in wonder. And though Amber never said it aloud, she believed it, too. Because faith had begun doing what medicine alone could not. Spring came early that year. The garden outside the Cruz mansion was alive again. Roses in bloom, fountains whispering softly, and the air scented with hope. One morning, Madame Cruz's voice echoed through the halls. "Amber, come quickly." Amber dropped the laundry basket and hurried upstairs. She found Jeremy standing before his mirror, his reflection glowing in the sunlight. "Look," he shouted, his voice bursting with excitement. Amber froze. Tiny strands of hair, thin but real, were sprouting across his head like new life after a storm. "We are growing back together." Jeremy laughed, running into her arms. Amber's throat tightened as tears streamed down her cheeks. She kissed his forehead gently. "Yes, baby," she whispered. "We are." Within months, the doctors confirmed it. Jeremy's cancer was in remission. The chemotherapy worked. The battle was over. The Cruz family decided to celebrate. The mansion was filled with music, laughter, and light once again. Tables overflowed with food, the garden glittered with fairy lights, and guests, friends, family, and doctors gathered to celebrate what they all called a miracle. Jeremy wore a crisp white suit, his short new hair combed neatly to the side. But when it was time to cut the cake, he didn't reach for his parents' hands. Instead, he turned and reached for Amber. "Come on, Amber," he said, grinning. "You're my hero." The crowd fell silent. Cameras stopped clicking. Madame Cruz covered her mouth, tears spilling freely. Sir Cruz's eyes glistened as he placed a hand over his heart. Jeremy lifted his small voice so everyone could hear. "She shaved her head so I wouldn't feel alone. She stayed when I was scared. She made me brave." Amber's lips trembled. She knelt, wrapping him in her arms as the guests applauded through tears. Later that evening, after the laughter faded and the guests left, Amber and Jeremy sat together under the tall oak tree at the edge of the garden. The stars shimmered above them like gentle witnesses. Jeremy rested his head on her shoulder, his voice barely a whisper. "Promise you'll never leave me, Amber." Amber smiled, brushing his cheek. "As long as you want me, Jeremy, I'll be here." And she meant every word. For in a mansion built by power and gold, it wasn't wealth that healed the brokenness. It was a woman's quiet love, a love that gave without asking, believed without proof, and stood firm when hope was thin. That night, the Cruz estate didn't feel like the house of a billionaire. It felt like a home. True heroism isn't found in grand gestures or luxury. It's in compassion that expects nothing in return. Because sometimes, the richest hearts wear no crowns. And the purest love comes from the ones the world forgets to notice. If this story touched your heart, don't just scroll away. Hit subscribe, like this video, and share it with someone who needs a reminder that goodness still exists. Because every time you share these stories, you help keep love alive.